Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here with you. And Mike, thanks for that kind introduction. Yeah, Mike and I moved into the Avant at the same time, and it's kind of like we're back in college. Like it's being on the same floor with Mike. It's like a dorm floor, and we have a couple other friends of ours who live there. So it's kind of like reverting back 50 years ago. I actually spoke to this group about 25. I think it was about 25 years ago, and it made Harry Jacobs had invited me, and so kind of coming back here reminded me just fond memories of Harry, and I understand he started the group originally, and he was great friends with my father, and the Jacobs were and are great family friends, and so good memories of them. So I'm not sure exactly how this normally goes, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about our business. And then try to talk about a few things that hopefully made us able to succeed over the course of years, and some other things where I think we fell short, and then talk about a couple of the challenges that we face right now. But I'd encourage you to jump in and ask questions at any point. It doesn't have to be a speech; it can be a dialogue back and forth if you'd like. So we are at Baillie Lumber. We're in the hardwood lumber business, and I would say related wood product business. And so let me just, our business really has three segments, and I'll just kind of give you a headline on that, and then go through and talk about each one of them in a little bit more detail. We have a lumber manufacturing and trading business, which is made up of sawmills, dry kill facilities, as well as kind of a wholesale brokerage business, and that's kind of our historic business. I'll talk about that a little bit. And we have 25 different manufacturing sites in the East, from Wisconsin to Kentucky down to South Carolina. Second part of our business, which is about equal in size in terms of revenue, we have a distribution business. And that's kind of the next step down from our manufacturing business. We'll sell our lumber to our own distribution facilities, and we have 40 distribution facilities around the country. And then the third part of our business is a flooring manufacturing business. So it's a flooring company called Mulliken Flooring, which makes solid hardwood flooring and sells it across the United States. So those are the three segments that make up our business. So as Mike mentioned, we just celebrated our 100th anniversary back last summer, which was really exciting. The business started in 1923 by a guy named Jim Baillie. And it's an interesting story. At that time, he was a young man, and he worked as what was called a tally boy at the Port of Buffalo. And what that meant was wood would come on boats and barges through the Great Lakes. And the Port of Buffalo was a huge port at that time. It would get discharged, and then there were no forklifts. And so all the boards would be taken off by hand. And this guy, Jim Baillie, would measure the boards. So we call it tallying the lumber. And so as a young man, he did that, and then decided to get involved in the wholesale side of that business. So he basically never owned any facilities, just set up a business where he would buy lumber and sell it to a customer without ever taking possession, and normally take a 5% commission. That was kind of how it worked. So from 1923 to 1957, he continued on that. By 1957, he had two partners that worked with him. And through a long story that I won't tell, my father got to know him. My father was a city kid in Chicago. He and my mother grew up in the city of Chicago, went to Wheaton College just outside of Chicago. And he got to know this guy, Jim Baillie, would travel out through Chicago, and through a family connection, my father got to know him. And so in 1957, when he graduated, he decided not to go to work for IBM or whoever else was the place to go work for in those days, and had never been to Buffalo. Drove out to Buffalo with my mom 2 days after they got married, and started working for Jim Baillie. And at that time, it was an office in Hamburg on the third floor, 110 Main Street, and there were three traders, we call them, just people buying and selling lumber, and two support staff at the time. So at that time, Jim Baillie was getting a little older, and in 62 or 63, my dad was able to buy the business from him. And I would say for the first, my dad was always very humble, but for the first 4 or 5 years, things went sideways. Did okay, but there wasn't anything extraordinary in the business. And then two things started to happen in the late 60s. First, he was able to start acquiring some manufacturing facilities. typical kind of thing where they were, buying lumber from a sawmill, and the guy wanted to retire, and Dad said, okay, we'll buy that from you. And so that was kind of the start of it. The second thing was the opening of the export markets for hardwood lumber. Up until that time, the market had pretty much been like the furniture market down in the Carolinas. There was a big furniture market in New England, Jamestown, even up in Michigan. But the export markets opened up for hardwood lumber. First, in the late 60s in Japan, it was interesting, there was a bowling alley craze in Japan in the late 60s, and they were building bowling alleys that were 3 and 4 and 5 stories high. And so when you bowl, the first, whatever it is, 10 or 15 feet that you run up and drop the ball on is made from hard maple. And so the Japanese were just buying, gobs of hard maple to make these bowling alleys. And it was about a 18-month to 2-year thing. It just it started with a bang, and then it just stopped. And it was done. And so that was kind of the first export experience. Then in the early 70s, the export business in Northern Europe, in Holland, Belgium, Germany, France started going. That was primarily driven by the furniture market. And then the late 70s, early 80s, things started getting going in Asia. And first it was Japan, and then Taiwan. And at the time, it was basically low-cost manufacturing. It was making furniture in those countries and shipping it back to the U.S. and to Europe. And so what would happen over the next 20 years, a country would make furniture, but then their economy would develop, wages would go up, and they would become a consumer market for our goods, and the manufacturing would go somewhere else. And so that kind of chased around Asia and Southeast Asia for the next 20 years or so. I came to work in the business in 1990, and it was just when the Southeast Asian business was getting going. And so I developed our markets in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam, and learned the business by traveling 6 times a year to Asia, back and forth. It's hard to imagine. I had 3 young kids and did that, and I look back and I watch my grandkids now with my kids, and it's like, wow, I'm amazed, that mostly my wife would just like what she did as I was traveling and growing the business. But anyway, the business developed, and then over the last 20 years, really, the export markets have been driven. The European markets continued, but about 20 years ago, the Chinese market opened up. And at first, the Chinese market was, again, low-cost manufacturing base. And then about a dozen years ago, the Chinese market turned into a consumer market. And so now a third of our lumber goes to China, and it goes into products that stay in China. And a typical thing in China, they'll build a 30-story apartment or condo building, and they'd be 1,000 to 1,200 square feet. And our wood would go into the flooring, go into the cabinets, go into the furniture, go into the doors that are in there. That's the market for our product in China. And Vietnam is our second largest market now, and that's the place, it's kind of the workshop of the world. That's where the furniture, kind of medium and low-end furniture that comes back and gets sold through retail stores here in the U.S. gets made. So that's a little bit of a history of our markets. Customer base for our product, our lumber, it's not structural. It doesn't go to, into the structural part of the house, but it's basically interior application. It's cabinets, it's flooring, it's furniture, it's molding and millworks, that kind of thing. So just a little bit more about our lumber business. We have our manufacturing operations, and they include sawmills, where we're going out, and we have foresters who go out and meet with landowners. Could be any one of you, if you owned 50 or 25 or 50 or 100 acres, and they'll enter into a contract with the landowner to cut the timber. So it's typically trees that are of a certain size, generally like 16 inches in diameter and bigger. You can go in and we'll cut those. Usually we get a contract for 18 months to 2 years to do that. And then from a landowner's point of view, if you do that correctly, somebody can come back in every 15 or 20 years. So it's almost like an extended crop. Unlike corn you harvest every year, timber you harvest every 15 or 20 years. So that's what we do. We get logs that way. We bring them into our sawmills. saw them into boards, and then we put them into what are called dry kill facilities. And that's basically the main thing you have to do with the wood to make it usable is to suck the moisture out of it. And so once you do that, it's ready to be used, and then we sell it as a raw material. We've continued, even though we have 25 different manufacturing sites, we've continued our trading or brokerage business. And in many ways, our salespeople, that's what they like the best. I mean, they love to put the deal together where you might go and buy a load of lumber from a sawmill down in western North Carolina and sell it to a customer in Shanghai. I mean, we do that kind of stuff all the time. And that, in some ways, it's turned into a smaller part of the business, but it's still kind of the heart and soul of the business. And our guys really like doing that. We've been able to grow over the years, over the last 12 to 15 years in particular, through acquisition. We've done 8 acquisitions in the lumber manufacturing space and 4 or 5 in the distribution space, which I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So that's the lumber manufacturing space, which by revenue is about 45% of our business right now. The other segment that's about 45% is our distribution business. And that's interesting. In the mid-'80s, my father running the sales, and we like to have a distribution partner in every major market in the country. And we didn't have one in Salt Lake City, and we didn't have one in Orlando. So he met a person, a young guy in each location, and set each of them up as a distributor. And these were really small operations, 4 or 5 people, something like that. And so in the beginning, we would sell our lumber to them, and they would sell it. And within about 9 months, it became really clear there was a crossroads. And the crossroads were these facilities going to be just an avenue for us to sell our lumber into those markets, which would have been fine, or were they going to be separate independent profit centers, such that the guys running these would have the ability to buy lumber, not just from Baillie lumber, but from our competitors, if they could get a better deal, and B, could they buy and add other products to what they were selling? Because they generally are selling to cabinet shops, and cabinet shops are also buying plywood, medium density fiberboard, all different things like that. And again, it was my father. Luckily, he was wise enough to choose door B and say, no, you guys are independent profit centers. Do what you want. Your sole mandate is to make money. And if you don't buy lumber from Baillie Lumber, that's okay. We're here to make money. And that really kind of fueled the growth of these distribution yards. And so we now have 6 distribution groups with about 40 locations. And they sell a variety of products. Lumber is only about 20 to 25% of what they sell. They sell a lot of plywood. They sell, if you've heard of melamine, which is particle board with kind of paper thermally fused on top of it. Medium density fiberboard. They sell flooring. So it's really helped us diversify beyond just the hardwood lumber. The way these work, it's a warehouse of between kind of 50,000 feet on the low end to 120,000 square feet on the high end. We'll talk about this in a second. Mostly rented. And so we'll just buy we're not manufacturing anything there. We're just buying the products in and reselling them out to the same type of customers. So cabinet, flooring, furniture that are smaller, and they're serviced by these distribution facilities. The way that we're structured, and this is one of those issues I'm thinking about a lot right now. But these 6 different distribution facilities, we don't have one president of all of our distribution facilities. They all have. Many times it was the founders still, but there's one person that runs them, and I essentially act as kind of a chairman of the board. I'm not involved in the day-to-day business there. And so as I've had conversation with different people, it's like, well, wouldn't it be better to consolidate them and have one guy that runs? And it may be at some point, but that's kind of the whole issue of how much do you consolidate things and how much do you leave them kind of dispersed and leave kind of local management. It's just been a really interesting question for us, and we've generally erred on the side of kind of letting people run their own deal as opposed to trying to centralize. And I think sometimes we've gotten it right and sometimes we haven't. So that's a little bit about the distribution segment. And that's been the segment, honestly, that's grown the most over the last 10 years or so. We've been able to do some nice acquisitions there. The last segment, which is about 10% of our business, is flooring manufacturing, Mulliken Flooring. You can Google them and you'll see their products. But we acquired that company in 1994, and they're now either the second or the third largest solid hardwood flooring manufacturer in the United States. So we do solid hardwood flooring that's unfinished, that you might buy, have a contractor come in, lay it down, sand and finish it. We also do pre-finished flooring. We'll put the finish on in our plant. And then we also import engineered flooring, which has a thin wear layer on the top and then some substrate underneath it. And this was a big thing. The flooring industry's biggest competition today is LVT, or luxury vinyl tile. It's a replacement for hardwood flooring. And one of our big customers said, we're selling this LVT and we'd like you guys to import it and sell it to us. And that was a hard hurdle to get over because that's our biggest competitor. But on the other hand, it was like, well, these guys are going to buy this product one way or the other, and we might as well be the one that sells it. So we now import this luxury vinyl tile and sell it to our customers. Our customers on the flooring side, about half of them are the big boxes. Menards, which is like a Home Depot or Lowe's in the Midwest, is our single biggest customer. But we sell a lot to Floor and Decor, to the new now Lumber Liquidators, Home Depot, and Lowe's. And then the other half of it goes through what we call industrial distributors. So there's, in every major metropolitan area in the U.S., there's a flooring distributor who will stock our product and then sell it to contractors who come in and buy that. So that's a little bit of the description of the three segments of our business. I thought I would share with you, I think actually, probably the most important thing that we ever did. I mean, think about strategy and acquisitions and this and that, but in the mid-90s, for a lot of reasons, we decided that we're going to really work hard at developing our purpose statement and our values. And we spent a lot of time doing that. And, it's something you can be cynical about. And like a lot of people have them, and they're kind of long and wordy, and like, do people really read them and do they care about them? And so we wanted it to be simple and short and really reflect who we are. And so our values are, and we always try to do better, but people in our company talk about these. And there's some of the values on there are values that could be part of any company: to grow profitably, of course, to demand honesty, but then things like to encourage risk-taking are peculiar to our company. Like, it goes back to the whole brokerage trading part of the business. Like, the way the company got started is we would go to a sawmill and say, we'll sell all your lumber. We don't know where we're going to sell it, but we'll sell all your lumber. And then we just have to go out and find out where we're going to sell it. So there was inherently a risk-taking that was involved in it. And so as we developed our values, we said we want to reflect that part of our company that's unique in that sense, and have that as one of our values. So the one thing I would say is, if this is something you're thinking about doing, is to, again, there's some things that are probably applicable to everyone, but the encouraged risk-taking was kind of really specific to us. And the value and grow people. I think most people would have something about people. But for us, kind of developing our people, having development programs, giving them opportunities to progress, that's really been part of the heart and soul of our company. And so that's reflected in those values. The purpose was kind of interesting. We originally had let's see if I can get this back in here. We originally had a mission statement that we still have, and it just is long, and it's long enough that I'm not sure I could get it right if I said it today. But we were like, we just need something that's short and memorable and that will roll off people's tongue. And so our purpose as a company is to help others succeed. And basically that was I think it was 1996, a group of us, we actually went down to Kiowa Island, and were there for a weekend and said, we wanted to figure out what our purpose statement should be. And we went through and so we were guided by, there's a Harvard Business Review article that talks about how you develop your purpose. And essentially what it says is ask the question why 5 times. So if you said, what's your purpose? And somebody just said, to make money. Okay. And so, well, why? Why do you want to make money? And just kind of keep pressing yourself. And then when you finally get, and usually you'll have to answer that question 5 or 6 times. And at the end, if you do it right and you spend the time, you'll get to, underlying all of it, what is your real purpose? And for us, I won't go through the detail, but for us, we just started telling stories about how we had helped people, suppliers, customers who had fires, and we extended credit, beyond what it was prudent to extend to them. A truck driver who had gotten hurt, and this is my father, kind of set him up as a dispatcher with a couple other trucks that other people drove. Just stories about how we had helped other people, and that became our purpose. And we found over 30 years it has so many legs. I mean, it applies, of course, to our customers, to our suppliers, to our employees, and also to the community. Again, a cynic could look at that and say, well, sure, what does it mean? But it's something that I think our people have really, gravitated to and taken to heart over the years. Let me just finish up with a couple comments on things I think we've done, pretty well over the years that have helped us. One, we've grown through acquisition, and in general, we've kept the people on when they wanted to. We've kept the former owners of the businesses on, and they've run it. And I think that's pretty unusual for that to work out. A couple different cases of guys who were in their early to mid 60s, sold the business, didn't have any equity anymore, and we said, we're not in the business of buying distressed businesses. We like to buy good businesses, and we're like, if you guys want to keep running it, have at it. And so we let them keep doing it. In some cases, they continued to do that for 5 or 6 years after they'd sold. We paid them a salary, but it's unusual for an owner to be willing to do that kind of thing. And so, I think that's something that kind of helped us. I think developing our purpose and values early on is something that's really helped us. Expanding beyond hardwood lumber in our distribution facilities has really helped us diversify. I'll talk in just a minute. It's a really, really challenging time in the hardwood industry, and having those distribution yards that sell other products has been really helpful. And then I think just continually wrestling, not always deciding that we're going to centralize things because we might be able to get some efficiencies out of it, but thinking hard about when do we want to centralize and when do we want to let things remain kind of like in a federation model where we give a lot more empowerment to people who are running facilities. Sometimes it leads to conflict. Sometimes it's not as efficient, but you kind of gain that ownership that people have. So we've, for us, it's been a kind of a fine line of when we do each. What we haven't done well, I think, to the point I just talked about, I think we've been too slow to change in a lot of cases. As things have changed, over the years we've had to close plants or consolidate over the years, and every time when I look back, so the only mistake we made is we didn't do it sooner. That we waited. Maybe it's going to come back. Maybe it's going to get better. We don't want to do it. And every time I look back, and actually we're going through a little bit of it right now. And you look back and you say, we should have done that a year before. We should have done that 2 or 3 years before. I think there's times where we, part of our success is we've grown our volume, we've grown our revenue, and there's probably times when we've looked at kind of emphasized that and haven't balanced it enough with what's the return we're getting on our assets. And so there probably have been times where we've chased the growth a little bit. It hasn't really hurt us, but as I look back now, I say there's probably some times where we could have chased the top line growth a little bit less and thought more about what does it mean for the bottom line. And then just a real specific one, I look back and it's probably the biggest miss. Our distribution yards, in the early days, we didn't buy these. We would rent them. And the philosophy, which I think is good, was we want to invest our money in the business, in inventory and receivables, and not in real estate. Well, as I look back now, over, not in the last 2 years, but low interest rate environment of the last 20 years, if we would have bought all of our warehouses and essentially paid ourselves rent over the years, we'd be way ahead. So that's probably the biggest thing I look back and I say, wish we would have done that a little bit differently. Finally, just the challenges, and this is mainly for our lumber business. Unfortunately, the hardwood lumber business itself it's a shrinking industry. Back in the early 2000s, we measure our volume in board footage, and there was about 12 billion board feet of hardwood lumber cut in the U.S. Today, there's about 5 billion board feet cut, and so we've continued to grow. So I mean, our market share has increased. So it hasn't stopped us from growing, but it's not a growing industry in and of itself. And so as we think about what does it mean for us to continue to grow, we're facing that. And one of the reasons for that is substitutes. Talked about the LVT with flooring. If you look at cabinets, used to be almost all solid hardwoods. A lot less solid hardwoods go into cabinet doors. So we're trying to think of some of this we need to do a better job as industry marketing our product, but some of it's just not going to change, and we need to recognize it and say, where do we focus our attention? And for us, it's more at the high end of the market, but really getting clear on that. And then the final thing is not to bring politics into this. I'm sure we have different views around the table, but just from our business point of view, the Trump administration will be really challenging with tariffs. So what happened last time when President Trump put tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the U.S., the Chinese responded with tariffs on our goods. So we suddenly had 25% tariffs on our lumber going into China. Through a set of circumstances, those tariffs came off back in the beginning of 2020, but they're likely to come back on kind of in the wake of the trade policy of the new administration. So that's not a political statement about either camp, but it's just a reality for us that we think there's going to be tremendous headwinds for our international business. Let me stop there. So I'll stop there. Yeah.
We obviously hear a lot about Canadian fires over the last few years. California always seems to be burning.
Right.
What do you see in that? How does that look from your world?
Yeah. No, there's not one answer to that, but I would say, the biggest cause of that is poor forest management practices. Like, people think they're doing the environment a favor by not harvesting timber, but a lot of those fires are happening because of that. Because healthy forests, you cut the big trees and the small ones grow up, and when you don't harvest the timber, you kind of get this canopy effect with stuff down below, and it makes it more conducive to fires. Yeah. So I'm not saying like every forest fire is a result of that, but for sure, a lot of those could have been either lessened or avoided if there were better forest management practices.
And who's in charge of that? Who's in charge of forest management?
Well, federal government. There's a lot of federal lands. So the private lands, for the most part, unless you have somebody, who has a strong personal view on it, most private lands are harvested. People kind of figure it out and do it. But it's mostly the government-owned lands that don't allow the harvest. It's actually interesting. Like, Pennsylvania is a good example. The Pennsylvania State Game Commission is they kind of have religion on this. They're very active in selling timber responsibly. And so they're a good partner. They're a good government partner. But they're one of the few. The federal government's not a good partner, and a lot of the state governments are not good partners.
Do you harvest all your timber on American soil, or do you have any overseas?
Yes, all on American soil. We do import some lumber from tropical lumber from Africa, from South America, from Asia, but not in the log form. Whenever we import it, it's already sawn into boards. So.
I'm in the pulp and paper industry. I spend a lot of time in wood yards and watching trees get turned into toilet paper and diapers and things. How does your, I see the forestry work going on in that world. How does that compare to what you have going on in the lumber world? Is it similar?
Yeah, I mean, the paper companies so, we saw the logs, and what we're after are the boards for furniture and cabinets and stuff. But the inside, there's byproducts also. And so the inside of the log actually gets used to make pallets that, you ship machinery and stuff on, or railroad ties. And then you have sawdust, which is usually used to burn in our boilers. You have bark that goes into landscaping, and you have chips, which go into paper. So yeah, and that's actually been a little bit of one of our challenges. There's been paper companies closing, and you can't transport chips a long way economically. So if you have a sawmill near a chip plant or a paper plant that's closed, it's problematic. Yeah. Yep.
Do you or have you ever owned your own woodlots and forests?
A little bit, not much. The problem is that you would have to invest so much money in timberlands to own enough timberlands to source the logs that you need, that it's really a completely different business. And so timberlands, it's interesting. Timberlands are typically owned, the larger ones, by TIMOs, Timber Investment Management Organizations, that have people invest in them, like insurance companies, college endowments, that are looking for like 25 and 50-year horizons, because timber is viewed as a really almost risk-free kind of long-term investment. So I've always found it interesting that our industry is kind of a backwoods industry, sawmills out there, and then if you go to to Harvard and Yale's endowments, they'll each have a slice of timber in their investments, because it fits a certain asset class that is a long-term kind of stable outlook.
Can you talk a little bit about the impact of the SAP implementation and what any significant changes or macro impact that's done for the business?
Yeah. So, and you get warned about this up front. But so 5 years ago now, we implemented SAP as our ERP system, and people tell you no matter how difficult you think it's going to be 2 or 3 times as difficult, and they were right. It's just inherently really, really challenging to do it. And I think I'm glad we did it, because at some point I think you kind of have to do it. As you grow, and over time it just takes longer than you think to kind of get into it. But it gives you access to data and the ability to kind of slice and dice data in a way that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do. Probably I would say the biggest disappointment is we actually thought that it might save money for us, and it doesn't, because what happens is it does allow you to eliminate some jobs, but you end up adding more jobs. People that are taking care of the system, they tend to be higher priced people, and so you end up spending more on those folks. So to summarize, it's a painful process. I'm still glad we did it. If I could go back 6 years ago, I'd still do it, because I just think it's one of those things you kind of have to do, because whatever you had before is no longer being serviced and upgraded. So anyway, yeah.
You've been approached by private equity to sell out
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
daily?
Not daily, but regularly. Yeah.
When did you become $1 billion company in sales? What was the first year you hit $1 billion in sales?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it was probably in the early teens, 2012 or 13, 14, something like that. Yeah.
I know your engineered flooring and luxury vinyl plank and tile is all manufactured overseas. Is there any opportunity at all to bring that manufacturing?
Yeah, there is. There actually, so companies like, you may have heard of, floor covering companies like Shaw and Mohawk do make some LVT in the United States. It's still the biggest volumes made overseas, but they do have plants. In our flooring plant, we do make engineered. We have two different types of engineered flooring I didn't say that, but that we make. It's really difficult to be competitive with stuff coming in from overseas. But yeah, there is some of it made domestically. Yeah. Yeah.
So you talked about the distribution
Yeah.
and, the sales cycle, but do you actually have teams of loggers that go in the woods to get the raw materials out, or is that
Yeah.
all subcontracted?
Well, it's technically subcontracted. But the way it normally works in the sawmill business is that you have a logger, which can be anywhere from like one or two people, father and son, to a bigger group with mechanized equipment. But typically, and this is because of workers' comp issues, for the most part, try to keep them as being independent contractors. And it's always that fine line of are they really independent contractors, employees? But typically a logger will work almost exclusively with one sawmill. Not always, but there tends to be that alignment. So, we'd say, well, he's one of our loggers. Well, he's not technically an employee, but he's an independent contractor.